Oh. I have this really big fear that in general, my industry, internet criticism, review, does a massive disservice to art in general. I'm not trying to say like overall I think it's bad to follow critics or reviewers, but when you do this job for many, many years, inevitably you start overthinking things. For a long time, I feel like I've been just trying to state whether or not I like a book. That is how I approach review, right? I get far more nuanced than that. I talk about various aspects of the writing, but at the end of the day, it can often feel a little bit hollow to me. Granted, there are certain stories I don't think I could go beyond that with. They didn't really affect me in any kind of profound way or change anything about myself, and so when it comes to the review, I feel like I've done the best job that I can because it was just either forgettable, average, fine, but not, something that really impacted me. And so I just give my take and move on. There's stuff that's so bad, I can talk about how it failed in some pretty entertaining ways. I think that's why those videos get more views. But every now and then you find something that starts to challenge you. It starts to really push into who you are, make you reevaluate certain parts of yourself. And if you're lucky, you can encounter that kind of art at the right moment in your life. And that is why we are doing quite the different setup and conversation for Sun Eater, because I don't think everyone's going to love Sun Eater as much as me. I don't think it's going to find every reader at such a crucial moment like it did myself. But I'm happy to say that this is a story, a read that has reinvigorated me in so many ways, not only in a professional aspect, really got me passionate about a story, really got me wanting to dig in far deeper to even other stories to find what other people might be connecting to. But on a personal level, I found this journey, this epic, which it quite frankly is, it's a science fiction epic, to resonate with a very important moment in my life that I had to go through recently. Many of you are probably aware that I had to take a break last year. I really screwed up my life. I made some mistakes. I was not grounded. I was just not operating in the way I needed to. And I ended up just pushing away people who were core to me being able to maintain joy, and I had to pretty much restart and rebuild. And right when I was in the hardest part of that process, as anyone who's had to really work on themselves will tell you, confronting your flaws and working on them is Herculean. It's overwhelming. You need professional help if you're going to be able to sustain it, or at least a great support system around you. And while I was doing all of those things, I happened to pick up a story that is fundamentally about a character doing the exact same thing. And I was lucky enough that that story is being told by an author who deeply understands, it seems, I'm not sure how, what exactly that entails, the dark and light of confronting your demons. And that, at its core, at least for me, is where the joy of Sun Eater comes into play.
He has this constant rolling, crisis of conscience. And I think that often, people are able to be most objective about themselves when they're very clear-eyed about their faults. And I think guilt and shame are mechanisms for being able to do that. And he certainly feels guilty and ashamed of certain things that he's done.
It was Berserk and then Sun Eater, which have some parallels that were very helpful to me. In my previous reviews for Sun Eater, I kept it positive. I kept it upbeat and energetic because, that's how you retain views on YouTube. You overact some of your emotions, of course, all to give your audience a glimpse into your core feelings of what you experienced, how a story struck you, without having to be extremely vulnerable about it, right? At least that's me. I don't know if other reviewers feel the same way. You don't want to bare your soul in every video, but you at least want to accurately portray, live up to the emotional value you found. As I've caught up to Sun Eater and gone through side stories and the main books, and I'm about to take on Disquiet Gods, I don't really think I can do that performance anymore and do the story justice. Dramatic. That's not to say there's not an element of performance happening here. Obviously, I have a highlight light and have done something I haven't done in ages here on the channel, attach a knife to a mic to kind of subtly instill or do whatever I can to communicate to the audience that, like, this book took me back. It really got me into why I started loving doing this job in the first place back in 2020, 2019, just getting swept away in these adventures. And I put up all of this framing, all this dramatic, let's strip away the character, well, maybe putting on a bit of another one, just to say the deconstruction and reconstruction of Hadrian Marlowe is one of the most successful arcs I have come across in fiction. Because at its core, that is what Sun Eater is. Strip away the galactic setting, strip away the alien threats, strip away the exploration of Earth's lost history and all of that, and the real heart of Sun Eater is about someone having the courage to successfully rebuild themselves and make mistakes doing it. For those of you who do not know, Sun Eater is the story of a man named Hadrian Marlowe who is born into privilege, but that privilege comes with the downfalls that are commonly associated with epic fantasy or science fiction stories, which, to clear something up right now, Sun Eater is sci-fantasy. Take that as you will. And through a series of events that's still up to where I am in the series now, about to read Disquiet Gods, are a bit of a mystery. We don't know what exactly happened to Hadrian to have him wake up in a very classical story type fashion on a planet where he has been stripped of his privilege, and while he still absolutely had hardships in his real life through his family, the hardest hardships to deal with, arguably for anyone, are the tragedy of family. But he is then confronted with the reality of his privilege. Granted, he still is absolutely validated in how just terribly he was treated in his childhood, but at the same time, just because you have gone through some harsh things, that does not mean you are able to just limbo under the reality of your situation. If your feather bed lies on a pile of bodies, it doesn't matter if you didn't put the mattress there, it's still where you sleep. And I think that's one of my favorite choices early on in Sun Eater, where we're following someone who is intentionally obnoxious. Christopher Rocchio has compared Hadrian to Attack of the Clones Anakin Skywalker, but unlike that character, it's a very deliberate and nuanced approach to what a brat who is hyper-intelligent can be and become once they are forced into hardship beyond that they are accustomed to. This is the first very well-placed note that made me glue myself onto the emotional journey of Hadrian Marlowe. I am someone who has had a very nice life in many ways up until this point, but through my own actions and through the world that exists and through family drama, yeah, there's absolutely been hardship, but that does not erase the privilege I've had at the same time. The way the character was set, how personal the initial conflicts were set, and how furiously the story then pulled away from those initiating stakes to then toss this character essentially in a fish out of water situation. While I did not like Hadrian yet, I immediately latched onto where I believed it was going, and I was so happy that I was right. We watch in a painstakingly laid down web from Christopher, Hadrian fall into trap after trap, fail and fail, yet unrelentingly uses every opportunity to improve himself, to do better. There's this achievement of balance for the consequences of Hadrian's actions and a framing of them for him to constantly improve without giving up that makes me rapidly turn from basically detesting Hadrian to admiring him, while he is also maybe a space Nazi.
What did you just say?
Just to be clear, I don't relate to his beliefs. Justice Turmoil, which is another interesting angle to Sun Eater, in my opinion. I like that this narrative kind of challenges us to sit with someone who we probably wouldn't be very comfortable sitting with. There's also the creative decision to have Hadrian have this strange charisma that makes him very believable as the person who can garner this following. Not only do we kind of have to be uncomfortable with what he believes in, but making it a bit more intoxicating is the fact that at several different points throughout the series, Hadrian is just a charismatic badass, and you totally feel like you would want to join his crew, just not serve the people he's serving. But then he kind of starts to push back against those people, so you do want to get on his crew, but then really bad things start happening to people on his crew. Anyway, back to what I was saying. Just wanted to clarify.
I'm glad you did.
But that becomes his second big hurdle, right? He is trapped in a society that is horrific in its situation, and he initially pulls away from it, but at the same time, just to be able to survive, take care of those that he cares about, has to then play the game. And this is where a new kind of trauma is introduced into the Sun Eater series. Brutalizing Hadrian. Hadrian is extraordinarily arrogant. For someone who is willing to reevaluate themselves, for someone who wants to improve themselves, Hadrian's arguably also a narcissist. That being said, this is also a chosen one story. And so the narcissism isn't exactly misplaced.
I think this is usually where writers maybe go wrong in dealing with stuff like this, because people say they hate like chosen one stories. I don't really believe them because they like grew up watching Star Wars, and I know you like that. Shush. But I think where the chosen one thing goes wrong very often is people just like have everyone still treat them like they're normal people, and usually, you know, people get trapped in this weird cycle where people aren't treating them like they used to anymore, right? You know, you see this in Dune with Korba, right, who suddenly, and Stilgar even, who become Paul's worshippers, right, to cease to be his friends, and that's like a huge loss for Paul, right? And he mourns that. But you see this in history too, you know, with figures as they become bigger.
Hadrian is told by something that might as well be a god that he is special, and then he begins to display abilities that I won't spoil that do elevate him up to the status of a living demigod. Obviously, I stopped quite relating to Hadrian as much in those moments, but rule of cool is important, and we have some great rule of cool permeating Sun Eater as well. But I found myself at this point kind of comparing Hadrian to celebrities who you see just lose their goddamn mind, right? They seem to just live and operate on another planet than we do, but in today's culture, the way we treat many of these celebrities who are handed everything and given unimaginable for your average person wealth, I also don't find myself like necessarily blaming the person for going insane. Granted, I'm not saying they're a good person or should be forgiven, but in 2024, for your average person and for someone who is going to be constantly showered with yeses and praise and money, the path to insanity seems more a downhill slope than ever, and I mean that as easy to walk. Someone's going to take this out of context, so I need to just really emphasize, people who say horrific stuff should be held accountable for their actions, and as someone who is a bi man, no, bigotry should not be tolerated in 2024, and those people. But echo chambers are addictive, and human psychology is flawed. And deliciously, for Sun Eater, we see Hadrian Marlowe going down that same path. He's not insane, don't get me wrong, but there are moments in his leadership and how he treats others where, yeah, he's thinking of himself as, how dare you question me? A friend he ends up failing ended up just tearing my heart out. It stung to see Hadrian fall apart as a man, at least someone who I could continue to admire in a moment that demanded empathy from him, demanded understanding and patience, but who hasn't failed to be patient or empathetic at a point in their life when it was needed.
That he has a lot of like very complicated feelings about the role he's had to play, right? Because he isn't the kid that he used to be, right? He had a lot of unlearning to do in the first couple books about the nature of the world and the galaxy and the problem that he's facing in the series. But he still like wishes that kid had been right.
I want to agree with a sentiment I want to agree with the sentiment I saw spoken by a couple other members of the Goblin Horde that picked up the Sun Eater series and were discussing it in my Discord. I think that's where I found it anyway. Whoa. Reading Sun Eater instills a similar feeling in me that I got when I was first reading Wheel of Time and Stormlight Archive, or even The Expanse. One of those series that just hits you and you go, oh, that's my taste done well. It's a special feeling when you find a story where not only are you able to enjoy what is on the page, but there's this additional understanding that you hope is real of what the author is trying to accomplish. It's like your brave wains can align and you almost feel like you're watching them write the story over their shoulder. And as Hadrian captains the ship, metaphorically and literally for Sun Eater, Hadrian begins to be just submerged in the demands of this adventure. What I find to be equally as attention-getting in Sun Eater, beyond just the, space battles going on and sword duels, is watching a hero that I want to see succeed try not to drown. Everyone understands that feeling. Whether it's at work, your personal life, with friends, the demands of duty do not relax simply because you are going through it. And for that reason, and maybe the most human moment in any book I've read in the last couple of years, Hadrian quits for years. Not a day, not a week, not months, years. He walks away because he has to heal. And incredibly, the narrative does not treat that like a mistake. And instead, it's the right call for him to be able to process, grow, and change to be who he needs to be to take on the next step of the journey. And polishing this already wonderful concept within Hadrian's growth and journey is the fact that this note for him, this time to be able to process being deeply traumatized, is somehow ended with more loss and grief. But we see, because of Hadrian allowing himself that time, he's not only able to handle this additional loss, but he even makes it a part of his healing process. And it's not until Hadrian knows he is able to put the next foot forward with strength that he then takes the mantle of half-mortal back on his shoulders. He's Hadrian, the half-mortal, by the way. For good reason. No, actually, wait. Let me just say that in a better way. To quote Robert Jordan, duty is heavier than a mountain, death lighter than a feather. And Sun Eater feels like Christopher Rocchio heard that line from Landman Dragarin and decided to just build a whole story around it to unreal success. But I don't want this to come across as if this is reading The Road. It's not an endlessly emotionally taxing journey. There's one book that kind of gets there, but Sun Eater is, quite frankly, also a roller coaster. We are experiencing rule of cool left and right. There's gladiatorial style combat, cybernetic enhancements, commentary on eugenics, and a challenge to you to never just blindly agree with what is happening, no matter how badass it might come across.
I'm doing my part.
Because we are in a society that's, pro-eugenics. That's not good. But our hero has been educated to think that's fine, while also turning his nose up at and being creeped out by artificial intelligence or people who are willing to cybernetically enhance themselves because of interesting histories we are then told about through expertly delivered exposition. I believe that's a deliberate choice from the author to make sure you're never comfortable sitting with Hadrian, no matter how much you might weirdly like him or detest him, no matter how much you might be drawn into his charisma while acknowledging his flaws. Tantalizingly right when Hadrian seems like he might have reached some stability, right when he seems strong enough to fully stand against so much of what he's learned is wrong, Sun Eater finds a whole new way to hurt him. Because yes, you can overcome trauma. You can learn to process the pain of your past and present. But if there's one thing we know to be true about life, is that it doesn't mind kicking you while you're down. And that's where the series is left off, with this man who, like many great historical figures before him, which Hadrian is clearly based off, we don't know how stable he is. And, well, it seemed like he was on the right path. At a pivotal moment, tragedy struck again. And now the question going into these final chapters for the Sun Eater series is this going to be a heroic figure who's able to take a glorious return? Or is this going to be, like so many greats before him, a downward spiral into madness? Well, the series is titled Sun Eater for a reason. In the opening of the series, we learn Hadrian ended a war. And we're about to learn how. Because the whole story is him recounting a memoir. And he's done a damn good job of keeping us in the dark of just how little light the ending of this story might have. One of the best pitches you can give me on any book series ever is to just tell me an author has put their personal passions in the text, because that has such an incredible track record of coming through well. You know, it's commonly said that it's almost always interesting to hear someone speak on something that they find interesting, right? That is in the writing here, because Christopher Racchio loves the same genre as we do. He is in Sun Eater in some ways, acting as a steward for science fiction and history, not only referencing the literary classics for the genre, but also then folding in references to ancient Greek stories, Shakespeare, so much that is overt, and I want to admit, does walk a line of being like, that's a lot of references, my guy. But if you were going to write a science fiction epic, would you not want to shout out your favorite? Would you not want to go like, I'm going to name this guy Sanderson because I love Sanderson? I don't know. I at least totally understand wanting to put in and build in tons of references that might then compel my hopefully growing audience to then go on and read the books from the people who inspired and influenced me. Hell, I've done that in Neon Ghosts.
I understand the people who don't like it, especially early on. I went back to the same things too frequently, and I think that like, I understand the people who go through and find like every Gene Wolfe homage and say, like, you lose track of it when you're writing. You can't write the book in 2 days the way you can read it. So you're like, oh, I haven't done a Gene Wolfe thing in like 3 weeks. And actually, like, it was 5 pages ago, bro. But my intention was precisely that, was to communicate that I am also a fan, right? Science fiction fans have broadly, I think, been a really poor steward of their own traditions. And so much of the texts have also dropped out. When I worked for Baen Books for 7 years, and we did an anthology of women writers from like early science fiction. It was called... Christine Catherine Rush edited it. It was called Women Futures Past. And we tried to do like a big PR push with it, because the story is these writers didn't exist, basically. Like, women are only just sort of starting to get into the genre now. And this hurt my boss very badly, because she's been working in the field for 40 years, right? But also, like, you know, like C.L. Moore is wonderful, right? Lee Brackett is amazing. These are writers that like people just don't read anymore. And there's so much of science fiction history is just gone. Taking
everything I've said here and just brewing it together, the final concoction, what I'm trying to say is Sun Eater for me was so what I needed when I picked it up. I didn't just wake up one day while reading Sun Eater and go, oh my God, you know, problem solved. But it validated a lot of what I am having to process, and it made me not as afraid of trauma. It made me have a character who, as childish as it might seem to say, look up to and kind of latch onto the idea of for taking on my own struggles right when I needed it. It's like that song that just gives you goosebumps when you turn it on. Not only have I already done the typical review thing where I talk about structure and blah, blah, blah and other just Sun Eater videos, and I'll probably do it again for Disquiet Gods when it comes out. But that format of review didn't feel right this time. And if when I was going through things when I was a kid, Wheel of Time acted my escape from that chaos, and if when I was going through things as a young adult and a couple people around me died and I was really struggling with grief, Sanderson's work specifically was a nice, more lighthearted escape when I desperately needed it. Now that I've reached a point in my life where I don't need to escape for my own happiness and for the success of a family I'm trying to build, I need to confront demons, I need to be better. I was lucky enough to find Sun Eater when I did. And Berserk. If you like Berserk, read Sun Eater. If you like Sun Eater, read Berserk. There's a whole lot of trauma processing at the core of both of these series that I think is very indicative of the time they are written in. We are now more understanding of, generational trauma and its after effects than ever. And I think these authors are educated on those topics. So I guess I'm trying to say I'm just glad to be alive now as well. So that is my review of Sun Eater. You may not see me put all of the books up in an S tier in some video in the future. And, I'm sure I'll have criticisms of Disquiet Gods, but that's all the mechanics of review. At the end of the day, when it comes down to soul, I stand by what I was delighted to see Christopher Ruocchio put on the cover of his next book. For me, this is a classic in the making. It's taking so much of what is improving in the science fiction and fantasy genres in terms of understanding the human condition. While there were successful, endeavors in that in the past, Sun Eater is standing on the shoulders of those giants to hit new heights, while also being the best retelling of Dune ever.